Today, we are diving into a scenario that honestly feels like it's been ripped straight out of a geopolitical thriller. We're talking about a coordinated military strike that takes out the supreme leader of a major world power. We're going to walk through how it all went down, the decades of tension that led up to this moment, and of course, the explosive fallout that came next. So, let's unpack how a secret shadow war suddenly erupts into a massive global crisis.
So picture this. It's pre-dawn, still dark out. A whole series of fighter jets, armed with these incredible long-range, high-precision missiles, began taking off. Their destination is hundreds of miles away, and their mission, well, it's one of the most audacious, high-stakes operations in modern history.
In the target? It's located deep inside a fortified government compound in Tehran. You see, intelligence from both the CIA and Israel suggests that a huge chunk of Iran's leadership has gathered there for a meeting. And that includes the single most powerful man in the entire country, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
Just 2 hours after takeoff, the missiles find their mark. This is the very first move of a joint U.S.-Israeli mission, and its code name is Operation Epic Fury. The strike is a success. The Supreme Leader is dead. And in that one moment, the highest levels of the Iranian regime have been completely decapitated.
Now, what's really staggering when you look at this list is just how effective that initial attack was. I mean, it wasn't just Khamenei, the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces, the head of the National Defense Council, the commander of the super-powerful Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is basically the ideological heart of the military, all of them just gone in a single, perfectly coordinated blow.
And the numbers, they really reveal the insane speed and precision of this strike. In just half a minute, 30 seconds, a total of 30 senior Iranian officials were killed. The entire regime was thrown into absolute chaos before they even had a chance to figure out what was happening.
But an attack of this magnitude, it doesn't just happen in a vacuum, right? To really understand it, we have to rewind the clock and look at the decades of hostility that basically set the stage for such a drastic, dramatic act. So yeah, the big question is, how on earth did it come to this?
Well, the roots of this really go all the way back to 1979, with the Iranian Revolution that established the Islamic Republic and basically declared the US and Israel its sworn enemies. Then, in 2002, the discovery of a secret nuclear program escalated tensions like crazy. We had a brief moment of diplomacy with the 2015 nuclear deal, but that all got reversed in 2018, putting everyone back on a path of confrontation. And that ultimately boiled over into these massive, brutally suppressed protests in 2025.
Back in 2015, the goal was pretty clear. The nuclear deal, which was really spearheaded by the Obama administration, was all about diplomatically stopping Iran from building a nuclear weapon. That was the one thing that had the US and its allies really alarmed for years.
But then, just 3 years later, that entire policy was completely flipped on its head. President Trump pulled the United States right out of the deal, calling it horrible, and slapped sanctions back on. And that one act just dramatically tensed everything up again and put the whole region back on a war footing.
Okay, so let's jump back to the day of the attack. The assassination of the Supreme Leader? That was just the beginning. It was really just the first wave of a much larger, multi-stage operation designed to completely neutralize Iran's ability to even fight back.
The strategy was incredibly methodical. First, you have the decapitation strike that we've already talked about. The next step, Wave 2, was to take out Iran's air defenses, basically clearing the skies for the main assault. And then finally, Wave 3 was all about destroying Iran's offensive power, its missile arsenals and its navy.
And the scale of that third wave was just immense. I mean, Israel alone sent something like 200 fighter jets. That's a huge chunk of its entire air force to systematically destroy as many Iranian missiles as they could find. Meanwhile, US forces were targeting naval bases and other assets. It was just a show of overwhelming force, designed to cripple Iran's ability to retaliate.
But, you know, in the chaos of such a massive assault, there are always tragic consequences. Reports started to emerge of an airstrike hitting an elementary school right next to an Iranian naval base. Iranian state media claimed over 175 people were killed and that most of them were children. U.S. Central Command immediately announced they were launching an investigation into the incident. So, you'd think after that devastating blow to its leadership, Iran would be crippled, but the response was swift and it was furious. Under the name Operation True Promise, what was left of the regime unleashed a massive wave of retaliatory strikes, and not just against Israel and the US, but all across the entire Middle East.
The intensity was just staggering. In the first few hours alone, over 200 missiles came raining down on Israel. It was a clear, bloody signal that, even with its command structure in total disarray, Iran's capacity for revenge was far from destroyed.
And this slide, it just shows how quickly everything spiraled out of control. Civilian airports in Dubai and Kuwait were hit. The U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain was targeted. Allies like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, they were all dragged into the fight. This wasn't a two-sided conflict anymore. The entire region had basically become a war zone overnight.
So, with the Middle East in flames, the shockwaves were felt instantly all around the globe. It sparked this fierce debate over the legality of that initial strike and raised very real fears of a much wider economic and military conflict.
And the debate really centers on these two concepts. A war of necessity is when you're fighting to stop an immediate, unavoidable attack, but a war of choice is a preventative strike against a threat that might, maybe, materialize sometime in the future. The distinction here is absolutely critical, because under international law, one can be legal while the other is, well, not so much.
And that is the question that the entire world started asking. Was this strike a legitimate act of self-defense against a truly imminent threat like the U.S. claimed, or was it an illegal act of aggression, a preventative war of choice?
So let's look at the arguments. On one hand, the U.S. justified the strike by saying it was eliminating imminent threats. But on the other hand, critics pointed out that Iran was probably still years away from a nuclear weapon, and its missiles couldn't even reach the U.S. The U.S. called it a war of necessity. Others called it a war of choice against a country that was already weakened by internal protests. The debate is still raging.
But regardless of all the legal arguments, the human cost was immediate, and it was devastating. And these are just the initial reports. Over 555 people killed in Iran, with more fatalities reported in Israel, the UAE, and among U.S. troops. These numbers don't even distinguish between military and civilians, and everyone expected them to climb.
Then, of course, there's the economic fallout, which was just as swift. The Strait of Hormuz, that's the narrow waterway where a huge percentage of the world's oil travels through, it's now in a war zone, so oil prices just spiked. The world was suddenly staring down the barrel of a potential global energy crisis, something that could impact literally everyone's wallet.
Which leaves us with this final, truly unsettling question. Was this operation a decisive, preventative strike that actually stopped a future nuclear threat, just like its architects claimed? Or was it the opening shot of a catastrophic regional conflict with the potential to drag the entire world down with it? The answer, right now, remains dangerously unclear.